Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let us move to talking about the number of divorces which a man has. Well, a man can divorce his wife 3 times. The first 2 of these are revocable, so he can take the woman back when she's in her iddah period. And this is where Allah Jalla wa Ala says, الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. Divorce is twice, then after that, either you keep her with goodness or you let her go in a reasonable and goodly manner. And from the scholars are those who say that when it comes to a married servant, he has 2 divorces and not the full 3 which a free man has. Some other scholars say that it does not depend on the husband, rather it depends on the wife. If the wife is a servant, then the husband can divorce her at most twice and not thrice. Other scholars say that both of them are to be given consideration. So if both of them are servants, then the husband can divorce her twice, and if both of them are free, then the husband can divorce her at most 3 times. And some other scholars say that it makes no difference whether any of the spouses is a free person or a servant. In all cases, the husband has 3 divorces. And this is the opinion of the Zahiriyah, and they take from what is apparent in the Quran, where Allah says, الطلاق مرتان, the divorce is twice. And then Allah goes on to talking about the 3rd divorce, and that this becomes the baynunatun kubra. And this appears to be the correct opinion because of the generality of the evidence, that in all cases, the husband can divorce his wife at most 3 times. The 3rd one, of course, being the irrevocable divorce, and the first 2 being the revocable divorces. What about this situation? A man says, "It is upon me to divorce you." He says this to the wife. Does the divorce occur? Some scholars say yes, the divorce occurs, but the correct opinion is that the divorce does not occur until he actually pronounces the divorce. So for him to simply say, "It is upon me to divorce you," is not actually a divorce in and of itself, according to the better opinion. Another question, can a divorce be split up into parts? So for example, if the man says, "I divorce your finger," to the wife. So does this mean only the finger of the wife is haram for this man and the rest of the wife is halal? We say no. The divorce cannot be split up into parts. Rather, we say that if he was to divorce any part of his wife, the divorce will apply to the whole wife. So basically, it's either whole or nothing. Or for example, if he says 50% of you is divorced, so we give it the same ruling. We say no, 50% is not divorced, rather the whole of the wife is divorced. You cannot put the divorce into parts. It's the same thing when it comes to freeing a servant. A man says that 50% of you is freed. We say no, the whole of the servant is freed. You cannot free part of a servant in this way. So if you are going to free a servant, it has to be the whole of the servant who is freed. So as soon as you say that 20% of you is freed, then actually the whole of him becomes freed. Or for example, if he tells his servant, "Your arm is freed," we say no, the whole servant now is freed. Or what about this? We'll give a little variation. He says to his wife, "You are divorced, half a divorce." So in this case now, he's not making his wife into parts, such that one part is divorced and the other part is not. Now he's making the divorce into parts. So he's telling his wife, "You are now divorced, half a divorce." As opposed to somebody telling his wife, "You are divorced, you are divorced, you are divorced," 3 times. And we spoke about this hadith, of course, before, and we said that this is haram and that 3 divorces do not occur according to the correct opinion. But now we'll go the opposite way. He is now dividing the divorce up. He's not multiplying it by 3, he's now dividing it. So he's using a fraction of a divorce. So what about this situation then? Well, we say the same thing. We say if he says you are divorced half a divorce, it means you are divorced fully, because you cannot have half a divorce. It's either whole or nothing. What about if he says to his wife, "Your spirit is divorced from me, but not your physical body"? Do we say that divorce counts or not? Well, if we said before that if the husband says your finger is divorced, then we said that the whole body is divorced. Well, the point is that the spirit of the woman is more important than the finger, because the woman can still live without a finger, but she cannot live without the spirit. Obviously, the spirit is that which gives you life. So if the rule applies to the finger, then it also applies to the spirit, A fortiori, meaning to say it is more worthy to be applied to the spirit. With regards to the 3 divorces, those scholars who say that 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact 3 divorces, literally, they do make an exception. They say that if he pronounced 3 divorces, not intending 3 divorces, but rather he intended to emphasize the fact that she's divorced, then this will count as 1 divorce in accordance with his intention. Because it is very possible that a person repeats his speech or statement by way of emphasis. However, they say on this opinion that if he says it 3 times but there's a separation in between, then we would not accept his claim that he's only emphasizing the divorce. So for example, if he says to his wife, "You're divorced," then he speaks to her with some other speech on a different topic, let's say, and then afterwards he tells her she's divorced again, and then he speaks with her about some other topic, and then he says again that she's divorced. Now this is for the 3rd time. They say that this will not be accepted as an emphasis, because the point is now, between each of these 3 divorces, he separated between them by speaking something else. So if the matter gets taken to the court and he claims that no, I only intended 1 divorce, but I said it 3 times out of emphasis, then this would not be accepted, because here we have a strong indication which tells us that this was not in fact by way of emphasis, rather it was by way of intending 3 divorces. Whereas if he was in a state of anger, let's say, and he shouted out to his wife, "You are divorced, divorced, divorced." So here there is a real possibility that he's only making an emphasis. He's angry and he wants to clearly get the message across that the wife is in fact divorced, and he intends by this 1 divorce. So this would be 1 divorce, even on the opinion of those scholars who say that 3 divorces is in fact 3 divorces. Or perhaps he tells his wife, "You are divorced," but she was not paying attention. So he repeats this, "You are divorced," and maybe she's not paying attention, and he repeats it again, "You are divorced." So he ends up telling his wife she's divorced 3 times. But when we look at his intention, of course he only intended 1 divorce, but the only reason he repeated it was to ensure that his wife is listening. So again, even on that opinion, this would be 1 divorce, because your actions are judged by your intentions. So these were a few other issues pertaining to the number of divorces and whether the divorce can be divided up into parts, and whether the wife can be divided up into parts when divorcing her. Hadith number 933. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثلاث جدهن جد وهزلهن جد النكاح والطلاق والرجعة رواه الأربعة إلا النسائية وصححه الحاكم وفي رواية لابن عدي من وجه ضعيف الطلاق والعتاق والنكاح. From Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, there are 3 things which if said in earnest, they are in earnest, and if said by way of joking, they are still said in earnest. And these 3 concepts are al-nikah, al-talaq, and al-raj'ah, which is when you take back your wife after the divorce. This hadith is sahih, and in another version, which is weaker, the 3 things mentioned were divorce, freeing a servant, and the nikah. Hadith 934. وللحارث بن أسامة من حديث عبادة بن صامت رضي الله عنه لا يجوز اللعب في 3 الطلاق والنكاح والعتاق فمن قالهن فقد وجبن وسنده ضعيف. And there is another version of this hadith from Ubadah ibn Samit. The Prophet is reported to have said, "It is not permissible to play about in 3 affairs. These are number 1, divorce, number 2, the nikah, which is the marriage contract, and number 3, freeing of a servant. So whoever utters these words or speaks this, then they become wajib." This narration is da'if. So both of these 2 narrations, one authentic, one da'if, are talking about the same topic. This idea that the nikah and the talaq and the raj'ah, and also included in this, the fourth one, the i'taq, which is freeing of a servant, these are not to be messed about with. Clearly there's a time and a place for jokes and play, but these three affairs are not from them. So when it comes to the ruling of the marriage, the divorce, and taking back a wife from a divorce, and freeing a servant, then these rulings immediately take effect, whether you said them in earnest or in jest, because all four of these affairs are extremely serious affairs. Notice here that the sales contract is not included in this. So for example, if you joke about with somebody and you say, oh, I sell you my house for £10, of course this is a joke, nobody's going to sell their house for £10, and the other person says, yes, okay, I'll buy it from you for £10, and you're just having a laugh, then the trade contract, does it actually take place or not? The answer is no. You can joke about with trade contracts, but the same thing cannot be said with a marriage contract, or with a divorce, or with taking back a divorce, or with freeing a servant. Even if you were just jesting, it would take place or be in effect. So we find here that the Sharia does not allow anyone to play about in these affairs. These affairs are far too serious to be taken for a ride. But then somebody would obviously say, I was only joking. I didn't actually intend this marriage or this divorce to happen, or this freeing of a servant or taking back a wife to happen. It was just a joke, and surely my deeds have to be judged in accordance with my intention, and my intention was not to, let's say, divorce the wife. I was only joking. We say, yes, your intention was not to divorce the wife, but when you joked around, you certainly did intend to utter the words of divorce, did you not? The answer to that is obviously he did intend to utter the words of the divorce, even though he did not intend the divorce itself. But we say this is enough. For you to have intended the words of divorce will put the divorce into effect. You have no authority to deny the divorce being put into effect in reality. That is up to Allah Jalla wa Ala alone, not up to you. So you not intending the divorce makes no difference. The mere fact that you intended to utter the words of divorce will produce the consequences of your words, that the divorce takes place, because this is down to Allah Jalla wa Ala, not down to you. So notice the difference between intending the divorce per se and intending the wordings of the divorce. When you were joking, you didn't intend the divorce, fair enough, but you did intend the wording of the divorce. The same thing with the marriage, same thing with the raj'ah, taking back the wife after a divorce, and the same thing with the i'taq, which is the freeing of a servant. As long as you intended the words of these matters, then the consequences will take place, and these affairs will be put into effect. So we say the general rule is, when it comes to contracts, then if you are only joking, they do not come into effect, except for these contracts which are listed here in this hadith, because these affairs are not the place for joking. This hadith has a similar pattern to a few other ahadith in which the Prophet mentions a number and then he explains the number. So he's saying three things are taken in earnest in all cases. So when he says this, it would make the people interested and yearn to know about what these three affairs are. And so then the Prophet goes on to explain. Similarly, when he talks about 7 types of people who will be shaded on a day when there will be no shade except the shade of Allah. So now who are these 7 types of people? Of course, the companions, the ones who are listening, will be clearly interested in finding out. And so then the Prophet goes on to explain who these 7 are. So it's all about encouraging your students to want to learn more. As for the freeing of a servant, it immediately takes place. Yes, this is understandable because Allah Jalla wa Ala is really looking at you to free the servant. So any minor excuse to free a servant would be put into effect. And this includes you joking with him. And so likewise we find with many sins that you perform, from the kafara is freeing a servant. And this is all in Allah Jalla wa Ala really encouraging the people to free the servant and finding avenues to justify freeing a servant. This is what Allah Jalla wa Ala really wants, for Muslims to free the servant. Why hasn't Allah made taking a servant haram in the very first place? Would this not have been easier? Well, no, because if the Muslims go to war and they vanquish the kuffar in a battle, then they have every right to take these kuffar as servants, whether they are men, women or children. They will be the servants of the Muslims, and this is from the war booty which Allah has made halal. Therefore, obviously, He's not going to make this idea of taking people as a servant haram, because this is halal for the Muslims as war booty. The Muslim soldiers have put their life on the line. So if they do win, then they have every right to take the war booty, and from the war booty is the servants as the prisoners of war. So Allah has not made haram for Muslims to take servants, rather this is something which is desirous. It is better for the kafir to be a servant of the Muslim rather than be a free person causing corruption in the land. But if this servant of yours becomes a Muslim, then he is still part of your wealth, and this was the normal case back in those days. And Allah Jalla wa Ala did not make this haram because He does not take away the wealth of the people, but at the same time He does look at you to free the believing servant. As for the kafir servant, he is better to be under your control rather than be free and cause mischief and corruption. So if we take a look at these affairs, firstly the marriage, then the taking back of the wife after a divorce, which is the raj'ah, and then the itq, which is the freeing of a servant. All three of these, Allah Jalla wa Ala wants them to happen. He wants marriages to take place. He wants people to take back their wife after a divorce and to continue the marriage. He wants people to free the believing servant. He wants this very, very much so. So therefore, even if you say it as a joke, then Allah will use this as an excuse to implement it in the society, which is what Allah wanted from the very first place. As for the divorce, obviously Allah Jalla wa Ala does not want the divorce to take place. But still, we know from the hadith it takes place even as a jest. So what is the reason why this divorce comes into effect so readily in society? Well, the reason is when a person divorces his wife, normally these men are not quite right in the head. And so with these men, you can't trust them always. They'll say, you're divorced to the wife, but then afterwards they'll say, well, I was only joking. I did not intend this actually, you're still my wife. Because these will be men who normally would be emotionally affected a little more, and they'll just act on the spur of the moment. So out of their anger, they'll divorce the wife. But then afterwards, and when they regain their senses, they regret this decision. And then they'll say, actually, I was just joking. And this is what we mean when they are not quite right in the head. They are very quick to act on their emotions. And of course, this is a very feminine thing to do, acting on emotions and only seeing the here and the now, and not having this foresight as to where your actions would lead up to. This is normally you would expect from women. However, you can find some men who are like this as well. And so the point is that if we allowed the divorce not to take place simply because of a joke, then every man can simply say, I was only joking, and then we would not actually have any divorce taking place ever. Which basically means that a woman could be stuck with a man whom she does not want to be with. And these men, who are a little loose in the head, could take this idea of divorce as a joke. But the divorce is far too serious to be taken as a joke. So therefore we say that even though Allah Jalla wa Ala does not want divorce to take place in society, but still we have to be strict in implementing this, because we cannot afford men who are loose in the head to be taking this idea of divorce lightly. So they act upon their emotions, they divorce the wife immediately, only looking at the here and the now and not having any foresight. And then afterwards, inevitably, they will regret their actions, and then they will say, I was only joking. Well, you may have been joking, but Allah is certainly not laughing. Hadith 935. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله تعالى تجاوز عن أمتي ما حدثت به أنفسها ما لم تعلم أو تكلم متفق عليه. From Abu Hurairah, he says that the Prophet says that Allah has overlooked from my ummah those thoughts which occur to itself, meaning to the people of the ummah, as long as they do not act upon these evil thoughts nor speak about them. متفق عليه. Hadith 936. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إن الله تعالى وضع عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان وما استكره عليه. رواه ابن ماجه والحاكم وقال أبو حاتم لا يثبت. From Ibn Abbas, he says, the Prophet says that Allah has forgiven for my ummah the mistakes they make, that which they do through forgetfulness, meaning the sins they commit through forgetfulness, and the sins which they are forced to commit. The hadith is Hasan, because even though in and of itself it's weak, it does have supporting evidences. Both of these narrations don't seem to have anything to do directly with divorce, but really they do have plenty to do with divorce, and they have plenty to do with many other elements of Islam as well. So we find from this hadith then that a divorce is not simply what you think about. So if you're thinking of divorcing your wife, the divorce does not take place. It's only when you utter the words that the divorce takes place. And so this hadith then is a great ni'mah from Allah to this ummah, because otherwise, if it wasn't for a hadith like these, then the shaitan would simply have a field day with the Muslims. He would simply inject in them all sorts of wasawis, whispers from him, and the Muslims will then start to act upon these whispers. But the hadith is telling us here that any thought which comes to your mind is of no consequence. It's only when you act upon this or speak about it that the rulings will take place or the consequences would follow. What about when evil thoughts come to your mind, thoughts which are not befitting for you to think about with respect to Allah Jalla wa Ala? Well, the point is this: these thoughts coming to your mind is not a sinful act on your part. It is only when you entertain these thoughts and hold them that it becomes sinful. Otherwise, you have no control as to which thoughts enter your mind or not. And of course, this is something which happened to some of the Sahaba. They came to the Prophet complaining about this, and the Prophet said, "Does this actually happen to you?" And they said, "Yes, it happens to us." Meaning to say, these thoughts which occur to them, and they felt even too shy to repeat these thoughts. That's how bad it was. And the Prophet simply said, ذَاكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ. This is your plain and clear Iman in you. Meaning to say, it is only because of your clear Iman which you have in your heart that the shaitan feels the need to whisper these evil thoughts in your hearts, to try to make you doubt and to try to snatch this Iman away from you. Similarly, when somebody is praying to Allah Jalla wa Ala, the shaitan will come and put whispers in his heart to try to distract him from the prayer. This is why you find when the kuffar are praying their own batil prayers, the shaitan will not come and whisper into their hearts because they're upon batil anyway. So in other words, these kuffar have nothing that the shaitan wants to snatch away from them in the first place, such that he should whisper into their hearts to distract them in their prayer. But we find it happens to Muslims all the time. And this is in fact a positive sign for the Muslims, that the shaitan sees something that he wants to rob from you. Otherwise, if you look at a normal robber or a thief, he's not going to rob from the poor people. The poor people don't have anything to steal. You are only going to rob rich people or people who have something worthwhile stealing. And so this is the analogy between the kuffar and the Muslims. The shaitan sees something worthwhile stealing from the Muslims, but he does not see anything worthwhile stealing from the kuffar. As for the second narration of these narrations, then for each of these 3 points mentioned, we have evidence from the Quran. As for the forgetfulness, Allah saying, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. Our Lord, do not take us to account if we forget or make a mistake. So this is about the nisyan and the khata, your genuine mistakes which you made. So maybe you fell into sin because you did not know about the ruling. Or maybe you did know about the ruling, but you didn't know what you were doing, and that this was in fact haram, what you were committing. For example, you know you're not allowed to drink intoxicants. Now you're drinking this drink and you don't believe it to be an intoxicant, but only afterwards you find out, oh, hang on, this was in fact an intoxicant. You're not to blame. Or for example, if somebody drinks an intoxicant and he didn't know that this was haram, maybe he's a new Muslim, then again he's not sinful for it. So being ignorant of the hukum or the hal means that you are not taken into account. Likewise, if you forget and you commit a sin, then you're not taken into account either. As for you being forced to commit a sin, then again we have evidence from the Quran. We know you're allowed to commit kufr if you're forced to do so. As Allah says, مَنْ كَفَرَ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِهِ إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ وَلَكِنْ مَنْ شَرَحَ بِالْكُفْرِ صَدْرًا فَعَلَيْهِمْ غَضَبٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. Whoever makes kufr, then there will be a punishment for him, except for the one who is forced to do so, but his heart is at rest with Iman. But rather the punishment is upon the one who openly declares his kufr and is content with it. Then for him there is anger from his Lord, and he will have a severe chastisement. So the point is, if you're allowed to commit kufr, which is the worst of sins, if you are forced to do so, then any other sin is far less serious. However, you need to note here that this all applies to sinful activities. What about when it comes to obligatory activities which you must perform, and you didn't perform it because you forgot, or you were ignorant, or you were forced not to perform it? Well, we say you have to perform it whenever you can. And just because you were forced, or you were ignorant, or you forgot, does not excuse you from performing it the next time you are able to perform it. For example, you're praying the Salat al-Dhuhr, and you pray 3 rakat because you perhaps forgot, or were ignorant of the ruling. When you find out, you must perform that extra rakat which you missed. And then of course you have to perform the sujood as-sahw. Or for example, if you prayed your prayer and you didn't perform wudu, then afterwards you find out you had not performed the wudu. You had genuinely forgotten, but then you find out you didn't perform the wudu. So what do we say now? Do we say now that there is no sin upon you, so therefore you don't have to repeat the prayer? Well, it's true, there's no sin upon you because you forgot. However, you do still have to repeat the prayer, because praying the prayer is something which is wajib upon you to perform, whereas sins are wajib upon you not to perform. So if you did perform these out of forgetfulness, then you're not to blame, and there's nothing upon you. But when it comes to those things which you must perform, and you did not perform them out of forgetfulness or ignorance, then you still have to perform them the next moment in which it is possible for you to perform it. So here a person prays his prayer without making wudu. Well, we simply tell him you have to make your wudu and repeat that prayer. Likewise with the example of the musi, the one who prayed badly. He didn't pray properly without khushu', and the Prophet told him to go back and repeat the prayer, despite the fact that this man was clearly ignorant of the ruling. But the Prophet did not say, because you're ignorant, you're not worthy of sin, therefore you don't have to do anything. True, he's not worthy of sin, but he still has to perform that which is obligatory upon him to perform. What about this situation? A person is on the Hajj and he does not stone the Jamrah, because we know that on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah you have to stone the Jamratul Aqaba. And of course this timing starts after the sunrise. But what happens if on that day he does not stone the Jamratul Aqaba, and then he enters upon the next day, so the 11th of Dhul Hijjah, so he has missed out a wajib action of the Hajj. It's now impossible for him to stone the Jamratul Aqaba, because there was a specific time period in which you have to perform that action, but that time period is now gone. Let's say he forgetfully did not throw the stones at the Jamratul Aqaba, so we say, okay, there is no sin upon you, and you cannot really do the Rami now because the time is over. However, there is still an alternative, which is that you have to sacrifice a sheep and give the meat to the poor people of the Haram. This is now wajib upon you because this is the alternative whenever you miss out on an obligatory action of the Hajj. As for if you make a mistake and you don't perform something correctly which you're supposed to do correctly, then if this was out of your own ijtihad, then you don't have to repeat the action and your ijtihad is correct. This is similar to what happened to Ammar ibn Yasir when the time for him to make tayammum came, because he was in a state of janaba and he was on a journey and he did not find any water, so he rolled around in the dust just like an animal rolls around in the dust. This was out of his own ijtihad, He thought that if I cannot bathe my body in water, then let me bathe it in dust, because dust is also purifying, is it not? This is why you can make tayammum with dust. And so the Prophet got to find out about this, and he did not tell him to repeat the prayer. Rather, he simply told him how to make tayammum properly. Whereas if we contrast this with the musi, then the musi was also ignorant of the ruling as to how to pray properly, but the Prophet here did tell him to repeat the prayer. But he didn't tell Ammar ibn Yasir to repeat the prayer. And the reason is because with the musi example, the time for the prayer was still present. Whereas with Ammar ibn Yasir, the time for the prayer had finished. And so therefore his ijtihad would be accepted from him, but in future now it would be obligatory upon him to perform the tayammum in accordance with the sunnah. So if we apply this to the divorce, then if a man tells his wife, if you talk to Zayd, then you are divorced, but the wife does not know that her husband said that. So if she talks to Zayd then, and she didn't know that this is what the husband said, then is she divorced? The answer is no, she's not divorced. Because this is a genuine mistake which she made. She was not aware of the ruling. Similarly, if you were to pray, and there is some najasa on your clothing and you're not aware of it, there is no sin upon you, and neither do you have to repeat the prayer. Or for example, the man says to his wife, if you enter such and such a house, then you are divorced, and the wife thinks that he means or intends by this at night time. And so if she enters by morning in that particular house, is she divorced? The answer is no, because she was thinking that the husband is intending that this means by night time. So if she is ignorant of the ruling or the situation, then she cannot be taken into account for this. And the same ruling if she forgetfully enters the house. What about rights of others? Then if you take away their rights through ignorance or through forgetfulness, then there is no sin upon you, however, you must return their rights. So if you damage somebody else's property out of ignorance or out of forgetfulness, then we say, okay, there's no sin upon you, but you must still pay for the damage. Because the rights of other human beings are based upon revenge and retribution. They are not based upon forgiveness. Whereas the rights of Allah over you are based upon forgiveness. Well, what about this? If somebody forces a man to divorce his wife, does the divorce take place? The answer is no, in accordance with this second narration. What about if a man is forced to divorce his wife with due right? For example, with the case of al-ila. After 4 months have passed, if he doesn't have intercourse with the wife after she demands it, then the hakim can force the husband to divorce the wife. This is clearly a case of forcing. However, the divorce does take place because this force is with due right. Hadith number 937. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال إذا حرم امرأته ليس بشيء وقال لقد كان لكم في رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أسوة حسنة رواه البخاري ولمسلم عن ابن عباس إذا حرم الرجل امرأته فهي يمين يكفرها. From Ibn Abbas, he says that when a person makes his wife haram for himself, then this is not to be considered as anything significant, and he says that for you in the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam there is a goodly example. And in a wording of Muslim, Ibn Abbas says that if a man makes his wife haram for himself, then this is in fact a yameen or an oath for which he must offer the kafara. So what this narration means then is that if a man says to his wife, you are haram for me, then this takes the ruling of an oath, so that if the man wants to have intercourse with his wife again, he has to offer the kafara, which is the expiation of breaking the oath. And this is whenever somebody makes something which is halal, haram for himself, then this takes the ruling of an oath. So it is as if he is saying that this halal object is haram for me, and I take an oath not to consume this item. So now, of course, it does not make it haram, it is still halal, because only Allah decides what is haram and halal. However, if he wants to go to that item, he has to offer the expiation for the yameen or the oath. And the evidence for this ruling in Surah Al-Tahrim, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّبِيُّ لما تحرم ما أحل الله لك تبتغي مرضات أزواجك والله غفور رحيم قد فرض الله لكم تحلة أيمانكم. O Prophet, why are you making haram what Allah has made halal, seeking to please your wives? And Allah is the forgiving, the merciful. Allah has ordained for all of you people to give the kafara for your oaths. So in this ayah, Allah is referring to the incident when the Prophet made honey haram for himself, because the wives of the Prophet, Aisha and Hafsa, they said that it gives off a nasty smell. So the Prophet said that he will not eat this honey again. So this took the ruling of an oath. So if the Prophet wants to eat this honey again, he has to expiate the oath. And so likewise here with the wife. If a man says to his wife that you are haram for me, then if he wants to return to her as if she was not haram for him, she is a lawful wife, then he has to offer the kafara for the oath. And so when Ibn Abbas says, لَيْسَ بِشَيْءٍ, it is nothing, in the narration which we have just recited, then this means it is not haram. Even if the man says that you are haram for me to his wife, she is not haram. So these words do not carry any weight, or they are not put into effect. So the point is this: if the man tells his wife that you are haram, and what he intends by this is not to approach his wife as if she was an ajnabiyyah to him, then if he is going to approach the wife, then he has to offer the kafara for the yameen. But if he tells his wife that you are haram for me, and he intends by this a divorce, then yes, a divorce has to occur. So if the man says to his wife, you are haram for me, what does he intend thereby? Does he intend not to approach the wife and to prohibit the wife from him? If that's the case, then this takes the ruling of an oath. Or does he intend a divorce? If he intends a divorce, then this takes the ruling of a divorce. What about if he intends neither? Well, if that's the case, then this also takes the ruling of an oath. And the evidence is, as you have heard, in the first two ayat of Surah At-Tahrim. What if his intention is just giving an information item? Well, the point now is that he does not intend to refrain from his wife, and neither does he intend a divorce. He's just simply telling his wife, you are haram for me. Well, let's ask ourselves, is this factually correct? The answer, of course, is no, it is not correct. So basically, he is speaking rubbish, and when a person speaks rubbish, this does not carry any ruling. So we simply say, you're speaking rubbish, and there's nothing left for you to do. It doesn't take the ruling of a divorce, neither does it take the ruling of an oath. It is simply somebody speaking gibberish. But the only thing he does have to do, however, is to repent from speaking rubbish. Because this statement which he spoke when he said, you are haram for me, this is a lie, of course, isn't it? And he knows it. So he has to make tawbah from that. But that's it. He does not have to expiate for any oath. So these are a few categories we've mentioned. Just to recap them, a person tells his wife, you are haram for me, just as a means of an information item. Well, upon him is tawbah, but nothing else. Secondly, he intends thereby a divorce. Well, then a divorce occurs. And thirdly, he intends thereby not a divorce, but simply to refrain from his wife. Well, in that case, if he comes to his wife, then he has to offer the kafara for the yameen. What about if he does not intend anything? He just utters these words without any particular intention. So what seems to be the weightier opinion is that this takes the ruling of an oath which he must expiate. And this is taken from the wording of Muslim, where Ibn Abbas says that if a man makes his wife haram for him, then this is a yameen, an oath, which he must expiate for. And if he intends by saying this to give a ruling of the Sharia, then this is in fact kufr, because anybody who says something is haram which Allah has made halal, or something is halal which Allah has made haram, then this is kufr. If you are going to give a ruling of the Sharia which directly opposes the Sharia, of course, because you are not allowed to put yourself in the position of Allah Jalla wa Ala, such that you can legislate what is haram and what is halal. So in total then, we have 5 categories. Let's just recap. A person tells his wife, you are haram for me, just by way of an information item, and that's his intention, then we simply say you have lied and you have to make tawbah. If he says you are haram for me by way of a sharia ordainment, so he's legislating now, then we say this is kufr. which puts you out of the fold of al-Islam. Thirdly, he says this with the intention of refraining from the wife, then in this case, he has to offer the kafara of breaking an oath. And fourthly, if he intends thereby a divorce, then a divorce occurs. And then fifthly, if he utters these words and he does not have any particular intention, then what seems to be the better opinion is that this is the same as the third category, that he has to offer an expiation of the oath. As for a man saying to his wife, "You are haram," then the scholars have differed on this. One opinion is, as we have said, and as what this narration implies, that this is an oath which must be expiated. Simply in accordance with the statement of Ibn Abbas here, إِذَا حَرَّمَ الرَّجُلُ امْرَأَتَهُ فَهِيَ يَمِينٌ يُكَفِّرُهَا. So this is the first opinion held by many scholars and the three Imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik and Ash-Shafi'i. The second opinion on this issue is that it depends on the intention of the man. So it would either be a divorce, or it could be an oath, which needs to be expiated, or it could also be a dhihar, which is when a man likens his wife to the back of his mother. So he's saying that you are like the back of my mother. In other words, you are haram for me to have intercourse with. And the third opinion is that this takes the same ruling as al-dhihar. And this is the famous opinion from the madhab of al-Imam Ahmad. So as for those scholars who say that this is a dhihar, they say it means the same thing. For a man to say, "You are like the back of my mother," and for a man to say to his wife, "You are haram for me," it is the same meaning. Therefore, it takes the same ruling as al-dhihar, which means that if he wants to have intercourse with the wife, he has to offer the expiation of al-dhihar, which is to free a believing servant. If you cannot do that, then fast 2 consecutive lunar months. If you cannot do that, then it is to feed 60 poor people. And other scholars say no, it is not the same as al-dhihar, because al-dhihar, the wordings used therein are much more ugly and repulsive to use. For you to say to your wife, "You are like the back of my mother," is far more repulsive and ugly than for you to tell your wife, "You are haram for me." Because if you tell your wife, "You are haram for me," then it is as if you are saying that if I have intercourse with you, it would be like having intercourse with any other ajnabiyya woman, meaning it would be like committing zina. Whereas if you tell your wife, "You are like the back of my mother," you're in fact telling her that if I was to have intercourse with you, it would be like he is committing incest. And incest is far worse than a normal incident of zina. But if a man tells his wife, "You are like the back of my mother," then this is dhihar, no doubt, even if he intends a divorce thereby. Because here now, he has used the specific words of al-dhihar. So we do not accept his statement if he tells us, "But I intended a divorce thereby." No, you didn't. As long as you used the specific words of al-dhihar, then the kafara of al-dhihar is obligatory upon you if you want to return and have intercourse with the wife. If you want to pronounce divorce, then you have to use the correct words, which would be words which indicate that you are divorcing her. But as for particular words of al-dhihar, then no, your intention does not count here. And in fact we find it is from the rulings of the people of Jahiliyyah that the wordings of al-dhihar would be a divorce. Because with the people of Jahiliyyah, when a man would tell his wife, "You are like the back of my mother," this would be a divorce for them. But the Sharia came along, and in Surah Al-Mujadilah, it changed this ruling of the Jahiliyyah. It says that it is not a divorce, but in fact it is a sin for which you must give a specific expiation. So, in conclusion, it appears to us that the most balanced opinion is the one we have given, in which we gave a total of 6 possibilities, depending on what the husband intends when he tells his wife, "You are haram for me." As for the madhab of Imam Ahmad, they simply say that if a man says to his wife, "You are haram for me," then this is exactly the same as al-dhihar. And it appears to us that this is a strict opinion and not really the correct one in accordance with the evidences. Because the Quran differentiates between a man making dhihar on his wife and a man simply telling his wife, "You are haram for me." In Surah At-Tahrim, it tells us what to do when you make something haram for yourself in order to refrain from it. But in Surah Al-Mujadilah, it tells you what to do when you utter the specific words of al-dhihar. So we find that there is a subtle difference between the two. However, if a man tells his wife, "You are haram for me," and then he comes to us and he says that what I intended by this was al-dhihar, then we would have to rule that the deeds are judged in accordance with your intention, and hence we would be justified in saying that this takes a ruling of al-dhihar in accordance with his intention. Similarly, if a man says to his wife, "You are like a pig to me." Now, a pig is haram to be eaten, so he's basically saying, just as a pig is haram for me to eat, so you are haram for me to have marital relations with. So again, just like the last situation, this would depend on his intention. If he does not intend anything, then this is an oath for which he must expiate. If he intends thereby to refrain from the wife, then again this is an oath from which he must expiate. If he intends thereby to refrain from his wife, then again this is an oath from which he must offer an expiation. If he intends thereby a divorce, then it is a divorce. If he intends thereby to give a ruling of the Sharia, then this is kufr. If he intends thereby just to give a news item, then we simply say you have to make tawbah for lying. But if he tells us that I intended thereby a dhihar, then we would have to go by his intention, and we would have to say, okay, it is a dhihar for you then, so you are not allowed to have marital relations with her unless you offer the expiation for al-dhihar. However, if he uses the specific words of al-dhihar, "You are like the back of my mother," then we say it does not depend on your intention, rather this is dhihar and it carries all the rulings of al-dhihar, so you're not allowed to have intercourse with her until you offer the expiation of al-dhihar. Here's another issue. If the man says to his wife that the matter is in your hands, so you can divorce yourself whenever you want to. He gives the wife the authority to divorce herself. We said before that this is not to be encouraged, although if it does happen then it is allowed, because we know the Prophet ﷺ gave his wives the choice that they can stay with him or they could leave him and enjoy the pleasures of this world, because his wives were demanding too much materialistic stuff from the Prophet. So if a man does tell his wife that the matter is in your hands, then we say yes, the wife can divorce herself either now or later on, whenever she wants to really, because here the husband has made her into a wakil, so she is working on behalf of the husband. Now the divorce is the job of the husband, not the job of the wife, but now the husband has made her into a wakil, so she can divorce herself on behalf of her husband. So if that's the case, then yes, she can divorce herself either now or later, unless the husband specifies the time period. So he says that the affair of divorce is in your hands just for this hour. So you have 1 hour to decide whether to divorce yourself or not. Or perhaps he might say you have 1 week. So in a case like this then, if the hour runs out or if the week expires, then the matter is no longer in her hands. So we say that this is a wakala, that the husband has made her into a wakil. How does this wakala break? Well, first way that it breaks is that if the husband has intercourse with her. Because if he has intercourse with her, then this shows that the husband has now broken this wakala. He does not want her to be a wakil anymore. The second way that this is broken is that the husband himself divorces the wife. So again, this shows that the husband now no longer wants the matter to be in the hands of the wife. For example, if person A appoints person B as his wakil to sell his car, but then thereafter person A himself sells his own car, then this is an outward sign that person A has nullified this wakala, and so that person B is no longer the wakil of person A. If the husband says to his wife, the matter is in your hands, then does the wife now own 3 divorces or just 1 divorce? Well, we say we have to go to the intention of the muwakkil, the one who has appointed her as a wakil. If his intention was that she owns all 3 divorces, then so be it. If his intention was that it is only 1 divorce that he was talking about, then so be it. So it boils down to the intention of the husband. Because the point is that any time in a wakala situation, we have to look at the intention of the muwakkil. Hadith 938 وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها أن ابنة الجون لما أدخلت على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودنا منها قالت أعوذ بالله منك فقال لقد عُذْتِ بعظيم الحقي بأهلك رواه البخاري. From Aisha, she says that the Prophet married Bint al-Jawn, and when she entered into privacy with the Prophet and was close to him, she said to the Prophet, I seek refuge in Allah from you. And the Prophet replied, you have sought refuge in the one who is great. Go and join your family. Al-Bukhari reported it. So this narration is about Amrah bint al-Jawn, who sought refuge in Allah from the Prophet, and it has been said that some of the wives encouraged her to say this because they did not want Amrah bint al-Jawn to be married to the Prophet. And as the Prophet ﷺ said himself in a hadith, مَنِ اسْتَعَاذَكُمْ بِاللَّهِ فَأَعِيذُوا, whoever seeks refuge in you by the name of Allah, then you must grant him refuge. And so the Prophet ﷺ did just as he said in this hadith, and he granted her this refuge from himself. In this hadith then, the Prophet told her, إِلْحَقِي بِأَهْلِكَ, go and join your family. What does this mean? Does this mean you can visit your family and then you come back? Or does this mean a divorce? Well, if we look at the context of this hadith, it is a divorce. Though it is not clear from the wording itself that it's a divorce, however, we do have indications from the context that this implies a divorce, and this is what the Prophet would have intended. So we simply say that a divorce can happen when the husband utters words which do not in and of themselves indicate a divorce, but if he has the intention that these words are for a divorce, then a divorce happens. So the point is, it's not necessary that the words of the divorce are uttered. Rather, we have to look at other things like the intention and also the surrounding circumstances and the context. For example, if the wife asks the husband, will you divorce me right now? And the husband simply replies by saying yes, then does the divorce occur? The answer is yes, it does, because even though the words of the divorce have not been uttered, but we can tell by the context of the situation that we do have a divorce on our hands. So the rule that we have to take is that if the man utters some words which can carry this meaning or that, so it could mean a divorce, but it may also not mean a divorce, then we have to look at the intention of the man. But we say we only look at the intention of the one who's uttered the words if he utters these words and they do carry this meaning of a divorce. So the intention is only put into play when he utters words which are ambiguous and they can carry this meaning or that. For example, if a man says, by Allah, I will not wear this item of clothing. So he's taken an oath here that he will not wear this item of clothing. And then he goes on to wear this very particular item of clothing, and we tell him, oh, you've broken your oath. And he says, no, I have not broken the oath. What I meant, or my intention with these words, is that I will not eat this item of clothing. And I haven't eaten it, therefore I have not broken the oath. Is this intention of his valid? The answer is no, because the words he uttered do not, by any stretch of the imagination, carry the meaning of eating the clothing. He said, I will not wear this clothing. So the word wear does not carry the meaning of eat. So we simply say, no, you cannot tell us that you intended that you will not eat the item of clothing. So in conclusion, when it comes to those words which are ambiguous, so they could carry the meaning of divorce, but they may not carry the meaning of divorce, then we have to look at firstly the intention, and then also we have to look at secondly, if the woman asked for a divorce and the man says yes, then clearly this is a divorce. But thirdly, we also have to look at the context of the situation. Maybe the husband uttered certain ambiguous words out of anger, and out of anger normally the husband is likely to pronounce a divorce, so therefore we can say that this is going to be a divorce, because we have reasons to believe that this is in fact a divorce, and not just the husband telling his wife to go and visit your family. So for example, if in anger he tells his wife to go and join your family, then it is improbable that he intends thereby to go and visit your family, because the context of the situation implies to us that he intends a divorce. Okay, let us take some review questions. So question number 1. We said that a nikah, talaq and raj'ah cannot be done in jest, and that it is taken to be in earnest. Why would the Sharia be so keen on putting the divorce into effect when we know that the Sharia does not really desire divorces?
Give the rationale behind this. Question number 2. If the husband says, if my wife speaks to Zayd, she is divorced. Now, if his wife speaks to Zayd, not knowing this condition which the husband has made, then is she divorced? Justify your answer. Question number 3. If a man says to his wife, you are haram for me, or you are like pork to me, then state the 6 possibilities that apply here. Question number 4. If a man utters ambiguous words, then how do we judge? Do we judge them to be a divorce or not a divorce? What are some guiding principles that we will look at?